Hello, friends, and welcome to the March 9th, 2021 live stream here at Verbal to Visual. Thanks for hanging out today. I'd love for you to drop a hello in the text chat. Let us know where you're joining us from as I sketch out a little bit of a welcome and starting sketch for today. Let me pull up the right thing. And also just let me know if you can hear and see me okay. It's always nice to have kind of external confirmation that things are set up the way you want them to. I think we'll go with let's go with a welcome sign in the grass. It's March 9th. It's a Tuesday. In case you didn't know. So to get things started today, I wanted to mention a potential format for these live streams. So I've been kind of committed to this experiment of doing this throughout the month of March, Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday, to just experiment with what it looks like to do like a 90-minute live stream about sketchnoting. What might be some useful things to bring in. To help you build your sketchnoting skills, to see what sketchnoting looks like. And while I'm doing this month-long experiment, I also have my eye toward what we'll do once I get back from paternity leave. I'm going to be taking April and May off. I'll still be publishing things here, but I'm trying to remove some time-based commitments. And just be able to spend a lot of time with my wife and our twin boys, which is very exciting. But I'm also kind of thinking about, okay, once back from paternity leave, what would it look like to maybe have a weekly live show? And what might the format of that show be? So I wanted to share a potential format for a live show that I sketched out yesterday. Since I did this on my own, with my own time, not live, probably like the quality of the visuals might be a little bit higher than what you've been seeing with these live sketch notes. I added some shading, which, by the way, shading is a topic of a upcoming workshop inside of Verbal to Visual. If you want to join that membership space and get access to courses and weekly live workshops. But I'm kind of thinking of a 3-part format for the live show. And this is a format we're going to be experimenting with today. For the first part of the live show, do some warm-up and skill building. So that will be the first segment today. We're going to do some skill building within the realm of building your visual vocabulary. I think that's kind of a thing that's worth doing regularly, kind of adding to the simple drawings, the icons that you're comfortable with and can kind of easily pull out in a note-taking session. So that's kind of part 1 of the live show today. Part 2, we'll hop into like a Sketchnotes of section. So this is where I'll do some sketchnoting of something that I've been reading, maybe a podcast that I listen to, And for these, unlike yesterday, in yesterday's live stream, I did some live sketchnoting of a podcast while listening to it. For these here, at least today, what we'll try, I've got some bullet point notes. Those will be the starting point for the sketch notes. So I'll talk through my sketchnoting process while kind of referencing those bullet point notes that I've already taken. I kind of like that often for a starting point. So that'll be part 2 of the show today. And then part 3 will be something within the realm of how to sketchnote. If there's a specific question that comes up in the live text chat today about sketchnoting, we can address that question. I also kind of have a queue of questions worth exploring, so I can always pull from that if no specific question comes up today. But I like this balance overall of the flow for maybe like a consistent live show. And again, this could be like the format, the 3 parts, the consistent 3 parts of a weekly live show, maybe, if that's the routine that feels like a good one to hop into, maybe come June or July. So today we're going to experiment with this format and see if we like it. And if not, we'll try something else. I could see either like kind of finding a consistent live show format, or it might be fun to vary the live streams each week. Right now, varying them each day, just depending on what sounds interesting, what feels helpful. So if you have any thoughts on this particular live show format, drop it in the text chat or in a comment down below if you watch the replay. By the way, I appreciate both folks who are able to join us live, but then also those that watch the replay of these live streams after the fact. So let's hop into part 1, which is some visual vocabulary building. Specifically, I want to focus on visual vocabulary around a theme or a topic. I feel like this is a useful activity that you can do in connection to the topics that you most frequently work with, the topics that you most frequently sketchnote, kind of developing some icons, some simple drawings related to that topic. It's a great place to start. And the topic that came to mind for me today was health and wellness. So I'm thinking of a mind map structure, not too, I guess a little bit different than kind of previous mind maps. Not really capturing a set of idea, but just seeing, let's kind of fill out around that title there, different icons related to health and wellness. And if you have a specific icon or visual to request related to health and wellness, drop it in the text chat and I'll add it. In the meantime, I will kind of just start building this out and see where we get. Maybe starting with kind of connection to a previous live stream. Kind of thinking about exercise here. Let's start with that. And what I think might be interesting too is what I find to be valuable is, you come up with some icon, some action with this topic of health and wellness in mind, but it could also be interesting to add kind of as many words related to that visual as possible. So here, I mean, the word that I had in mind, the concept that I had in mind was exercise. But of course, the specific thing that I show here is someone running. And thinking about running, the type of activity it is, that also brings to mind kind of stamina. And depending on what you're going with, like specifically lungs come to mind. Kind of it's an activity that can strengthen your lungs. Also think about kind of muscles in general. I guess in this case too, the specific muscles that you're working are your legs. Those are some words that might be connected to that specific visual. We'll see, I might play around with spacing a little bit. Other visual vocabulary related to health and wellness. Let's draw ourselves a heart here. A heart could be love. I think I want to add some, I don't know, kind of some radiating lines. I also think of connection. And even just generally, like overall health comes to mind. Kind of thinking next about the kind of a medical setting. Let's try drawing a stethoscope. Kind of imagining the shape of it. You got the earbuds, and then I think it's kind of like that. Ugh, this is real sloppy. And then it's got the actual stethoscope part of it. Not great, but not too bad. So here with like this specific piece of equipment, words like monitor, I guess kind of the verb to monitor, heart rate, exam, doctor, maybe hospital. Oops. So with running, we kind of got at like physical well-being. I also, with the topic of health and wellness, I think mental well-being is another important piece of that. So let's do a thought bubble. And there's got to be something inside of this thought bubble to help signify maybe like positive mental health. Guess you could throw in a smiley face in the middle there. That doesn't feel quite right. Although I did see there's a cool post recently inside of Verbal to Visual of someone who used thought bubbles kind of as like faces. I think this was Liz. If you happen to see this, Liz, shout out to you for sharing that. But including kind of eyes inside, and these might be too detailed eyes, but and maybe it's like, you don't want to trivialize mental health. I think I like that though. So here, kind of label this as positive mental health. Maybe meditation. Generally paying attention to your thoughts. Let's get a few more going here. Others related to health and wellness. Let's do something related to nutrition. I could see going with specific type of food. Apple is the first one that comes to mind. I have an apple for lunch, or rather an apple with lunch pretty much every single day. Let's kind of make it more of a, not quite a scene, but let's have multiple objects related to nutrition. So even just like maybe a glass of water to stay hydrated, an apple. What else is kind of like a typical healthy food? Maybe we'll just stick with those two for now. So here we've got nutrition, hydration, as we fill up the rest here. If you've got specific suggestions that you would like to add, throw them in the text chat. We've got some, healthy eating. We've got exercise. We've got something related to kind of doctors in the medical setting. Kind of, I used connection related to like heart health, but I think I want to do that again, or maybe get better at that concept of connection. Just overall well-being. finally, kind of thinking about kind of more personal relationships. Who's in your corner? Who are your people? And maybe thinking about, kind of drew one person as the person that's being focused on, but then other people in a slightly simpler, more abstract way as the kind of form of support. So this could be community. This could be connection. Relationships. There we go. I think we've got space for a few more here. What else might we add to visual vocabulary around health and wellness? I'm going to look up one of my favorite resources for exploring visual vocabulary. It's called the Noun Project. To maybe get at least one example here that doesn't just come from my brain. I think I'll just search health. See what comes up. So maybe to represent like a building could be a hospital, or it could be like a clinic, or just any sort of wellness center. Kind of real simply can be building. If people just saw that, they might think, oh, that's a house. But if we add kind of the well-known symbol related to kind of all things medical, the plus sign, that kind of gives that building some specific meaning. So that could be hospital, clinic, wellness center. That one came from the Noun Project. Let's find one more. Well, there we go. Let's do sometimes you need some form of medicine to help your body out with whatever's going on. So let's try drawing kind of a medicine bottle here with the lid up like that. Kind of a label. And then all sorts of details on that label. And that could represent medicine. Maybe just that. Any other words that would go along with that? Might just stick with medicine. All right, so here we've got a handful of potentially new pieces to add to your visual vocabulary around the topic of health and wellness. I'd be curious to hear if any of these in particular are completely new to you, if any stand out. And as always, there's always opportunity to kind of continue expanding. So this could just be a starting point, but does not need to be an end point. So with that, we have done a little bit of part one, completed that step. Let's use some color here. Why not add a little check mark next to that, do a little bit of warm up and skill building, visual vocabulary around a specific topic. Next today, I'd like to bring in some sketch notes. I'm going to do some sketchnoting of a book that I recently read. So let's give ourselves some more space here. Let me kind of want to play around with how I organize all of the sketches from a given live stream. Let's give a little bit of structure to it. So maybe we put those over there. Yeah, maybe we'll kind of do each of the sections like next to this outline here. So that was our warm up. Next, some sketch notes of. So the specific thing that I want to sketch note here comes from a book. That book is called The Art of Gathering. The author is Priya Parker. And I picked up this book kind of in connection at a time where I was kind of moving more of the work that I do in a kind of community-oriented direction, specifically this period of time when I shifted all of the sketchnoting courses that I've created within Verbal to Visual, moving those to a new platform. Platform is called Mighty Networks, that has like a really good blend of course features, but also community activity. And this book, The Art of Gathering, I feel like was recommended, I want to say on the podcast, What Works with Tara McMullen. It's also because of that podcast that I kind of found out about Mighty Networks and decided to move our online learning community there. And the reason this is particularly interesting to me, let me maybe add my interests in this book about gathering. Comes kind of from two sources. I feel like there are two gatherings that I host regularly right now. The first is weekly workshops. Those occur inside of Verbal to Visual. You can always check out verbaltovisual.com/events if you want to see the specific topics of each of those workshops. But then also, throughout the month of March here, and likely after it as well, I feel like these YouTube live streams are another form of gathering. It's not quite as interactive as those workshops. Those workshops happen kind of through Zoom, so we have the opportunity to see each other. Other folks come on and share their sketchnoting work. That's what makes those fun and particularly engaging. But even with these YouTube live streams, I feel like there is this opportunity to treat it as a gathering for the folks that happen to be able to show up live and are maybe sketching some things out with me. But then also even the folks who watch the replay, because it's this live thing, it has that sense of gathering to it. So I kind of read the book with those. When I was reading it, I didn't have the YouTube live streams in mind because I hadn't yet decided to do this, but I have always had the kind of what goes on inside of verbal to visual. That was kind of the filter through which I was processing and thinking about those ideas. How best to create and structure kind of a learning community where we're all working to master the same skill, sketchnoting, and we have these opportunities to come together to work on those skills and make some interesting things with them. So the specific idea, one chapter of that book, I'm gonna add a globe of sorts here. One of the chapters within this book has the title of Create a Temporary Alternative World. So that concept of like within a gathering that you might be hosting, how can you create this alternative world that might unlock some things for the participants of that event? What does that world look like? How is it different from kind of the day-to-day world? And to help create that alternative world, there's kind of this distinction between thinking about structure here. The non-alternative world, kind of the typical way. Let me yeah, okay. I think I know what I want to do here. There's kind of like a comparison and contrasting thing that goes on within this section. So first, let me just kind of label the comparison that occurs. It's basically the difference between create some more space here. etiquette and pop-up rules. So the idea here is that the typical gathering is kind of governed by like rules of etiquette that often are kind of dictated by the cultural norms of the setting that you're in. But though those aspects of etiquette can be limiting. So to kind of like create this temporary alternative world, there's this idea of like making pop-up rules, kind of constraints to your gathering that open up some possibilities. So what I'm going to do is sketch out the differences between etiquette, what that means if there's kind of strong etiquette in a gathering, and what pop-up rules can provide that make that experience potentially more transformative. Hello in the text chat to Danielle Montanaro. Our grade 6 and 7 class from Toronto, Ontario, Canada are back. Good to see you all. Yeah, I hope you kind of enjoy the ideas we're sketching out. May or may not. Well, yeah, it's kind of interesting to be talking about etiquette and pop-up rules and imagining folks in a classroom setting, because within your classroom you probably have some rules, some constraints to how you do things, and maybe some of those rules are consistent week to week. Maybe occasionally with different activities, you have different rules to kind of facilitate whatever it is that you're learning or working on that week or that day. It's kind of interesting. So first, let's identify the components of etiquette. Not an easy word to spell. So what are the features of a gathering that is based in kind of strong etiquette? One that Priya Parker identifies is fixedness. So this is a strong sense of permanence, and the enduring right ways to be. So what I want to do to kind of communicate that concept of fixedness is kind of have something involving like a lock. So we could, if we just wanted to go with like using an icon to represent this idea, you could just use a lock like this. Maybe there's a keyhole, even though I feel like in reality that keyhole would be on the bottom of the lock, probably not in that exact location. I kind of want to like I kind of want to make a container out of this though, to like contain that word fixedness within the lock. I guess you could kind of do something like that. There are these fixed rules that are unchangeable. You could maybe make that like a chain if you didn't want to do like a straight line, but drawing a chain kind of sounds hard. So let's stick with that. But I think I will add some of the details. So pieces like strong sense of permanence, where there are these enduring right ways to be. So here, we're kind of using one somewhat strong visual to represent that idea of fixedness or fixedness. I'm not sure exactly how I should be pronouncing that word, but one visual, but still kind of capturing the details. And I think since we're going to be doing a compare and contrast, I'll probably have this kind of a two column approach. I'll have etiquette on the left here, and then on the right, I'll kind of list out the qualities of these pop-up rules. Yeah, I think that's how I want to do it. The next component of etiquette is imperious. So here, some of the details about this word imperious, I'm pulling from some highlights of the book itself. It's the opposite of humble, minimal interest in how different cultures or regions do things, and it upholds a gold standard. So here I kind of think of, having some, like putting something like up on a pedestal. What comes to mind here? So imagining, I don't know, some sort of fancy thing here, and there's some gold standard, only one way to be. So here we're not so much using a container, but we still have a image there to kind of represent that word imperious. And then let's capture some of those details too. So here we've got the opposite of humble. Minimal interest in other cultures. And it upholds a gold standard. So again, with the first couple of ideas here related to etiquette, maybe for now at least to have more to kind of keep these different ideas in mind. To start, maybe we'll go with a more kind of mind map approach just so we can see them all a little bit better. So that's the second component of what an etiquette approach to a gathering looks like. Awesome. Catching up on the text chat. Thanks, Dan / Mr. M. I will go with one of those two. Dan says, we usually have rules for group work that helps to keep us organized and collaborative. I like that. The third piece of this etiquette approach. And again, we're going to be kind of comparing what etiquette looks like versus like pop-up rules. Put this one over here for right now. The third and final piece here is exclusion. So exclusion is designed to help you stand out from the mob and keep others out. And the idea here is to scale the social ladder, not collapse it. So this kind of inherently creates an other. So for this one, I think I want to think about like a fence to represent exclusion. Some sort of barrier to keep certain people out. Kind of creates an us versus a them. So we could just go with drawing a fence here. I feel like that's not quite strong enough of a visual to get at this piece about exclusion. So I'll keep thinking on that as I jot down like the details here. And I guess this is something that I kind of enjoy when sketchnoting something in this way. You know, you've got some visuals that you want to capture, but also some detailed text. Sometimes as you're capturing the detailed text, something about the like a new idea about the visual might come to mind. So you might kind of have inspiration later on about a better visual or a different visual for that particular idea. So with etiquette, the idea is for you to stand out from the mob, and just even like characterizing most people as the mob kind of gives you a sense for the tone of this type of way of approaching a gathering. And it's about scaling the social ladder. So if those are the three components of a gathering that is based in strong etiquette, what we're going to do next is kind of show what pop-up rules might bring to a gathering. And here I think I will do, yeah, I think it would be most helpful to do this side-by-side approach now. So kind of taking those visuals, turning them into a column. And it's interesting here with a kind of infinite canvas, I'm using the app concept so I can kind of like use the space in any way that I want. And it feels like it's just making sense to kind of do this side-by-side comparison, which happens to not work great for like presenting these ideas in a horizontal way on YouTube. So sometimes those form factors are worth thinking about if you're using Sketchnotes to present ideas from other people. And I guess because I am sharing ideas in this setting, I'm going to go ahead and kind of switch from that vertical, kind of a column approach. Let's do like a row approach that will still allow for kind of easy comparison between etiquette and pop-up rules that I think will fit better for the kind of specific format here. And just to make sure I communicate that these are the three pieces related to etiquette, let's go with this. There we go. Got them arrows to connect those ideas there. Now let's show how pop-up rules are different. But we'll kind of use the same, we'll stick with kind of the style or the sketchnoting format that we've been using for those three pieces of etiquette. So pop-up rules are not fixed. They are, in fact, very experimental. And I feel like that concept of experiment or experimental has come up enough that I have a visual kind of already ready. But there's a twist that I want to add to it. So the visual that I most often use, if something like experiment comes to mind, is kind of like, I think about science, I think about kind of a flask and, you know, combining a couple of things together to see what happens. Here, though, the thing that we're kind of combining in the experiment that's going on has to do with how people gather. So I want to like bring people into this picture. I feel like you could kind of do that in a couple of ways. And actually, I think what I want to do, I want to take away those marks that I made. And I'm not sure if this will work, but what's inside here, the experiment that's taking place, has to do with people and how they gather. So showing kind of individuals inside of that. I'm not sure if this is really working. It's a little cluttered inside. Gonna try one other. Slightly less cluttered. Kind of shade the people in a little bit. People hanging out. We'll stick with that one. I think this one's okay. But that question still remains of like, what are the components of this experiment, right? What makes this type of gathering different or unique? So I feel like having some sort of thing coming in here is still worth doing. And for this one, it's all about trying stuff out. And what's also important here is that the behaviors and the constraints of that gathering are temporary. So that's where like this creating a temporary alternative world comes in, where you're not bound by etiquette, but instead get to create these pop-up rules that allow you to be experimental and, rather than imperious, pop-up rules are all about being humble. So here are some of the specific things described. They're free of the ethnocentric classist pretensions of etiquette. So like free of pretension, I think is a good one of the detailed points that we'll include here. And I think humble I kind of want to bring a picture of a figure here. I'm kind of thinking of someone who is like thoughtful and curious. So maybe what that looks like, someone thinking, that's interesting. Someone that's more open-minded. And free of pretension. And I think this might be me making assumptions, writing my own twist on it, but I think a part of that humbleness is around has to do with curiosity. Curious and open-minded. As opposed to that imperious nature of holding up this gold standard that everyone else has to adhere to. And finally, in comparison to exclusion, pop-up rules are much more democratic. And it levels the playing field for outsiders, especially. So rather than being exclusionary, it's much more inclusive. And I think for this one, I want to draw kind of in contrast to that like fence that was this barrier between people, kind of just having more of like an open lawn, maybe, and a bunch of people hanging out. So part of the purpose of going with pop-up rules is that it levels the playing field. It's a big piece of the democratic nature of something like pop-up rules. So those are the kind of three aspects of pop-up rules, how they kind of compare and, well, how they contrast what you see within something that's more etiquette based. So I feel like, yeah, maybe I can just use the same structure here, or use of arrows. So it doesn't quite, if we had done like a column by column approach, I think maybe it would have been easier to do more links between fixedness and experimental, imperious versus humble, exclusion versus democratic. But I think those connections are probably still pretty clear with this type of layout as it exists. So what I might do next as kind of a little bit of final organizing here, playing around with spacing, I mentioned up front that kind of my interest in these topics is my interest in the book, The Art of Gathering, is connected to the weekly workshops that I host within Verbal to Visual, also these YouTube live streams. This question of, or this ability to create a temporary alternative world. I'm not selecting the things I don't want to select. Probably at that point where maybe I'm paying a little bit too much attention to spacing and organization here. And maybe I'll just add like a something to kind of add a little bit more title up there. And it's not a bad set of ideas here around this one aspect of how to think about gatherings and the opportunities that might arise if you create these pop-up rules that can be specific to a single gathering that creates this temporary alternative world to do something interesting and potentially transformative with a group of people. Yeah, I'd be real curious to hear in the text chat or in the comments down below if anyone has ever hosted or been a part of a gathering that had some sort of pop-up rules and what that experience was like. Within the weekly workshops that I host inside of Verbal to Visual, they have a kind of a typical flow to them, but I don't know if I've ever kind of specifically identified pop-up rules for a given workshop. It's just a fun way to think about how to like run a workshop, for example. What are the pop-up rules that govern what goes on during this individual gathering? So I think that's kind of my follow-up for after capturing these ideas. You know, when you're sketchnoting and when you have finished sketchnoting, the thing I like to spend a little bit of time on is specifically thinking about how would I like to follow up on these ideas. I've got this kind of helpful visual summary that I can look back on, and even just having spent the time to create something like this, it's going to help me remember these ideas. But it's not just about remembering, it's about doing something with them. So I think what I would like to do is for an upcoming Verbal to Visual workshop, approach it specifically with pop-up rules in mind. Not sure exactly what that will look like, but it's an exciting way to kind of frame a gathering. For now, I'll stay kind of zoomed in on those pop-up rules, the components of a pop-up rule gathering, as I catch up a little bit on the text chat. Katie said good morning a little while back. I love Priya Parker. I'm excited to jump into this lesson. Awesome, Katie. If you're still watching, I would love to hear if there's another kind of big idea from Priya that you've come across, whether it be from this book or maybe an interview that she did. Mr. M says, side question from our student Arvin. How did you get involved in sketchnoting? Good question, Arvin. My entry point into sketchnoting came from a TED Talk, a short, like 6-minute TED Talk called Doodlers Unite that Sonny Brown gave. Once I watched that TED Talk, I just got really excited about developing the skill. Because I wasn't much of a drawer or a sketcher before that. But when I saw that TED Talk, I was like, yes, I love I really like the idea of building out these visual thinking skills just because of how it kind of feels a little bit like a superpower. And I think that's what I thought when I first saw that TED Talk. It's like, ooh, that's a skill that I want to develop. And I've kind of just been doing deep dives since then. Yeah, the YouTube username concern asks, any thoughts on those who would say that verbal to visual is pointless and that everyone can learn from words in outline form? I think outlines get cluttered and like unfriendly real fast. Like the more details you try to add just to an outline, they're useful. And as I mentioned, I think even with the notes that I was taking here, I tend to use outlines, bullet point notes as the starting point when I'm working with the ideas. But I think there comes a point when outlines, they don't help you make connections. Maybe, yeah, let's do a little bit of time kind of exploring even just comparing and contrasting like outlines versus a visual summary. That actually sounds kind of like a fruitful topic to explore in the last 17 minutes of this live stream. We'll see if we can make it to create something meaningful or helpful within that how to sketchnote section of our live stream. If in case you missed it, we started today's live stream doing some visual vocabulary around health and wellness. Then we did some notes connected to Priya Parker's book, The Art of Gathering. And now kind of within the how to sketchnote, or maybe even why to sketchnote, just comparing and contrasting outlines versus I like the term visual summaries, so I think that's what I'll use as a comparison point. Oh, I'm curious. I meant to ask this of Mr. M, if your classroom is still hanging out here, if you have seen that TED Talk, Doodlers Unite, and maybe even if you have played it within your classroom. I'd be curious to hear about that. Probably should have just used the fill tool instead of the highlighter tool for this particular task. Oops. I still find myself sometimes incorrectly switching my brush when I mean to just switch the color. I feel like I do that like a dozen times per live stream. Not yet, Mr. M. Yeah, check it out. Watch it. It's been a while. I feel like I should rewatch that video now too. Almost just to like remind myself of what it was like when I first got into this before I really even knew about it. Okay, outlines. So, when I think about outlines, it's kind of just using you're only using text and a little bit of layout compared to like sketchnoting. I think about text, layout, imagery, and color. So with outlines, you do get at the text component, deciding how much like detail I want to include like within this reference thing here. And how that compares to something like a visual summary. And for this one, at least, I mean, what's interesting about sketchnoting is that there's a bunch of different visual formats that that you can go with. I tend, almost by default, to think of something like a mind map. But you could also do a flow chart or a like a visual metaphor. I'll throw a visual metaphor in here too, because I think it gets at the kind of unique advantages of creating a visual summary compared to just using a text-based outline. So within these, you know, there's still text included within these visual summaries, different types of diagrams. So the limitation of outlines is that they're linear. Right? With an outline, at least what I am thinking of an outline, you kind of can only go top to bottom. You can use indentation and Roman numerals and numbers and bullet points to get at some hierarchy, but it's still like the only way to take in that information is to kind of move top to bottom down the page. So let's just call that like a distinguished feature. There's a linear limitation. You can get at hierarchy. But what you don't get, that you do get with visual summaries, it's so much easier with a visual summary to like map out the connections between ideas. Can't really get that within an outline. You can get at some of those connections with a tool like Roam Research, maybe, which I haven't actually used, but I've just seen some videos on that kind of like note-taking app, I guess, that's text-based, but has all these kind of like linkages that you can make. But even with that, while you can link ideas, you can't really like see them all in one place. So again, like another component of a visual summary, a reason that you might go with the visual summary, if you need to be able to like literally see the big picture. If you zoom out on your outline and you just see this long running page of text, that doesn't give you a sense and kind of a high level sense for what's going on. So it's this like, you can see the big picture, but then you can also zoom into the details. And it's that like, that magnifying glass, that plus and minus magnifying glass that I think is pretty cool about sketchnoting. And then there's also just the fact that like visuals are easier to remember. They help you remember. I'd love to hear if there are other thoughts that folks have about this kind of comparison between outlines versus visual summaries, and whether you agree with me on the benefits of going with the visual summary, what those allow you to capture and work with that an outline doesn't allow for. Yeah, an interesting question. And there's also one dynamic here too, is an individual's personal preference. Like if you don't consider yourself to be a visual learner, then it probably isn't worth it for you to learn how to sketchnote. If for whatever you're doing, outlines are meeting your purpose, then stick with them. I think the reason that people are drawn to sketchnoting is when working with whatever it is that you're working with, if you get to the point where words alone and outlines alone aren't enough for you to wrap your head around whatever it is that you're working on, that's why kind of turning to something more visual is appealing to folks. Yeah, I'm going to catch up with the text chat. I might feel like I want to do a little more filling out of this piece here, but let me see what's going on in the text chat. Katie was sharing some ideas around the Priya Parker Sketchnotes. More and more events I attend have pop-up rules. That's interesting. They aren't usually called that in my circles, but we set up shared agreement, circle guidelines, or brave agreements. I like that. Things like tell the truth to yourself, about yourself, or no advice. Yeah, there was one specific example that if we had had a little more time, it would have been interesting to bring that into the sketch notes that I took. A specific example of pop-up rules, that would be something worth adding to that sketch note. Like, okay, what are some pop-up rules that you might go with? Katie also mentions I love her interview with Brene Brown. I almost sketchnoted that yesterday, but since I had just read the book, I went with a different Brene Brown interview instead. She talks about her upbringing and how her job as a kid was to be the peacemaker in a fractured family. That's really interesting, which is how her work began. So cool. Swinging back to kind of the current discussion here, Katie says, sketchnoting helps me access a different part of my brain and integrate new information in a more tangible way. Yeah. I like that piece of integrate information in a tangible way. Hopping back into Mr. M's classroom, student Ashley says, allows more concise summaries. Heck yeah. The Village Gravy says, I'm drawn to Sketchnotes because it allows me to synthesize many thoughts. I work with depth a lot. Like that. Mr. M says, Doug, thank you again for hosting. Time for our recess. Our students enjoyed the session. Thank you for joining us once again, Mr. M. And same goes for all your students. It's fun being able to kind of connect with a classroom like that in that way. I wanted to add some other pieces, like other reasons you might go with an outline, or at least like start with an outline. You can convey hierarchy through whatever headings you use, kind of your heading structure. Whoops. Outlines are kind of good for maybe more quickly capturing ideas. And I really, depending on what you're working on, sometimes it's nice to start with an outline and then from there move to a visual summary. Other times it might be helpful to go straight to like a visual representation. That's kind of an interesting follow-up question here. Like, when is it most helpful to go straight to the visual summary, and when might it be helpful to start with an outline? And that might be where the personal preference comes in. Like, if you grew up as a doodler and like consider yourself a visual thinker, you probably might be more comfortable going straight to a visual summary. If you didn't really consider yourself to be a doodler growing up, which I did not, you might be more comfortable starting with an outline, kind of using that format until you've reached the limits of its usefulness. And then from there, you go over and take those details and give them some visual structure. So that's why for me, kind of outlines are often a good starting point. I think I want to make sure to capture something about like the personal preference piece. Maybe just a few labels here to communicate that you know, each of these have pros and cons. Personal preferences are going to come into play. I don't really want to associate pros and cons just with outlines or personal preferences just with visual summaries. So maybe something like that. So here are some ways to think about the difference between using a structure like an outline when you're working through or thinking through ideas compared to going with a visual summary. And that might be where we will wrap up today's live stream. Thank you for hanging out. Amy in the text chat, big picture thinking. I like it. And again, I appreciate those who participated by sharing thoughts in the text chat, the live text chat throughout the live stream today. I always encourage you also to share follow-up thoughts down in the comments below if you watch the replay. Thank you, Simone. I appreciate you being here too. With that, let's do a quick little reference to the three components of our live stream today. I feel like that went pretty well. If you have thoughts on this kind of live show format, well, we did all three of the things. Let's get our 3 check boxes for today. We did some warm up and skill building with visual vocabulary around health and wellness. We did some sketch notes of The Art of Gathering by Priya Parker. Thanks for following along as I talked through and thought through how to do all of that. And we wrapped things up with the exploration of outlines versus visual summaries when working with ideas. Not bad for a 90-minute live stream, right? Because now it's been 95 minutes, which means that I should sign off. So that's what I will do. All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your day. Hope to see you again in a future live stream.